The butler's knees hit the gravel. Every servant behind him followed, a wave of bowed heads and white-gloved hands pressed to sides. "Your Grace," the old man said, his voice cracking on the second word. "Welcome home." And Vivienne turned to the man beside her, the man she had married 11 days ago, in a chapel that smelled of damp plaster and tallow candles, the man who owned nothing, the man who, it now appeared, owned everything. But that revelation belonged to a later hour. The story began, as most desperate stories do, in a ballroom. 11 days earlier, the music at Lady Pemberton's spring ball was doing what music in such places always did, filling the silence between people who had nothing true to say to one another. Vivienne Graves stood at the edge of the room, half concealed behind a potted orange tree, whose blossoms were wilting in the heat of 300 candles of tea. She was 24, the daughter of a baronet whose fortune had evaporated years before anyone thought to stop spending it. 3 London seasons had come and gone, and Vivienne had danced precisely 9 times. She did not blame society for overlooking her. She had, in her quiet way, perfected the art of being overlooked. It was safer. The gown was dove grey, a colour that made no promises. Her brown hair was pinned simply. She wore no jewels because there were no jewels left to wear. Mother, Lady Graves, had sold the last of them, a garnet brooch that had belonged to Vivienne's grandmother, to pay for this season's wardrobe and the rented townhouse on a street, just respectable enough to avoid comment. From behind her orange tree, Vivienne watched her mother work the room. Lady Graves was a small, sharp-featured woman who moved through crowds the way a pike moves through still water, with terrifying purpose. Night. Her target was Sir Philip Waldegrave, a man of 53 with a drooping moustache, a substantial income from Welsh coal mines, and a reputation for cruelty that preceded him into every room like a cold draught. He had buried 1 wife already. The tongue whispered that he had not been kind. Graves caught Vivienne's eye from across the room and gave a tiny, furious jerk of her chin. "Come here. Be seen. Smile." Vivienne did not move. Instead, she turned toward the tall windows that opened onto the terrace and the dark garden beyond. The cool night air touched her face, and she breathed it in like a woman surfacing from deep water. That was when she noticed him. He was below the terrace, in the service lane that ran along the back of the house, visible only because a lantern hung from a hook on the garden wall. He was clearly not a guest. His coat was rough wool, mended at the elbows. His boots were working boots, scarred and heavy. He carried a canvas sack over one shoulder, some delivery perhaps, or a repair completed after hours. He had stopped walking. A cat, thin and ragged, crouched by the gutter, watching him with the flat suspicion of a creature that had learned not to trust. The man set down his sack. He reached into his coat pocket and produced something wrapped in cloth. A piece of cheese, it looked like, or perhaps a crust. He did not toss it. He knelt, slowly, placed it on the cobblestones, and withdrew his hand. Then he waited, perfectly still, until the cat crept forward and ate. He did not try to touch the animal. He simply watched, his head slightly bowed, with a patience that struck Vivienne as almost reverent. When the cat finished and slipped away into the shadows, the man stood, picked up his sack, and walked on without looking back. It was nothing, a small, ordinary kindness. But Vivienne, who had spent 3 years watching people perform generosity for an audience, recognized something rare in it. This was kindness with no witness, no reward, no calculation. It was the realest thing she had seen all evening. Vivienne. Her mother's hand closed on her arm, the grip just short of painful. Sir Philip is asking about you. He wishes to take you in to supper. You will go, and you will be agreeable, and you will not ruin this. Lady Graves's eyes were bright with a desperate energy that Vivienne knew well. It was the energy of a woman running out of time. Mamma, do not mamma me. You know what is at stake. Your father's debts will swallow us whole. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. Sir Philip is willing to settle it all, every penny, in exchange for your hand. Do you understand? This is not a courtship, Dickie. This is a rescue. It is a sale, Vivienne said quietly. The slap was swift and precise, delivered behind the shelter of the orange tree where no one could see. It was not the first time. Lady Graves had always been careful about where she left marks. You ungrateful girl, her mother whispered. You will accept him, or I will have you declared unfit and sign the papers myself. Vivienne said nothing. Her cheek burned. She watched her mother straighten her gloves and glide back into the crowd, her smile restored as if it had never faltered. That night, Kitty, locked in her small bedroom in the rented townhouse. Her mother had taken the key as a precaution. Vivienne sat on the edge of her narrow bed and considered her options. They were few. She could marry Sir Philip and trade one form of captivity for another, this time with a man whose first wife had died with bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. She could refuse and watch her family slide into ruin, her mother's fury becoming her daily weather. Or she could do something so reckless, so completely mad, that it would burn every bridge behind her and leave her standing on the far side of a chasm with nothing but her own 2 feet. The image returned to her, unbidden. Man kneeling on cobblestones, offering food to a stray cat. No performance, no audience, just decency, quiet and absolute. She did not sleep. By dawn, her mind was made. Screen. She bribed the housemaid with a pair of embroidered handkerchiefs, the only things of value she still possessed that were small enough to hide. The girl unlocked the door at 5:30, her face grey with fear. Vivienne slipped out into the pale London morning, dressed in her plainest clothes, a shawl pulled low over her hair. Finding him took most of the day. At tea, she returned to the service lane behind Lady Pemberton's house and asked questions that made no sense coming from a woman of her bearing. A delivery boy remembered the man. Tall, quiet, dark hair, carried tools sometimes. That had been Nathaniel, he said. Does carpentry, odd repairs. Lodges on Wren Court, I think. Number 4. Wren Court was a narrow street near the river. The buildings, leaning toward each other, as if too exhausted to stand straight. Number 4 was a boarding house, with a blue door, the paint peeling in long strips. Vivienne knocked. Her hand trembled. She pressed it flat against the wood to steady it. The door opened. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps the lane had diminished him. His face was lean, clean-shaven, with dark brows and eyes of a startling pale green, the color of river water in winter. His hair was black, pushed back from his forehead, slightly too long. He wore a collarless linen shirt and an expression of carefully maintained blankness. Yes? His voice was low, unhurried. My name is Vivienne Graves, she said, and immediately felt foolish. Saw you last night, behind Lady Pemberton's house, with the cat. Something shifted in those green eyes. Not recognition, wariness. I do not know what you mean, miss. You gave it food. You knelt down and waited until it came to you. I watched from the terrace. She was talking too fast. She forced herself to slow down. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Harding, he said. Nathaniel Harding, and I am not interested in propositions. It is a proposal of marriage, Iconer." The silence that followed was so complete that Vivienne could hear a pigeon cooing on the roof above them. Nathaniel Harding looked at her for a long time, and his expression cycling through surprise, suspicion, and something close to pity. "You are either in very great trouble," he said, "or you are not well." "I am in trouble," she admitted. "I am being forced to marry a man who is cruel. If I am already married to anyone, they cannot compel me. I have £40. It is everything I have, and you chose me because I fed a cat. I chose you because you were kind when no one was looking. That is the only qualification I require." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. She would not flinch. She had done enough flinching. "There would be rules," he said at last. Her heart lurched. "Yes. Anything. This is an arrangement, not a marriage in any real sense. You will be Mrs. Harding on paper. Nothing more. I understand. And you will live as I live. There is no luxury here. There is no comfort. There is work and bread and a roof. And that is all." Daphne. She thought of Sir Philip's grand house, of what the walls of such a place might witness. She thought of her mother's sharp fingers and sharper words. She looked at Nathaniel Harding, his plain shirt, his calloused hands, his steady green eyes, and she felt, the first time in months, something that was not fear. "That is enough," she said. They married that afternoon in a registry office near Blackfriars. The clerk was bored and indifferent. The witnesses were a charwoman and a clerk from the next desk over. Vivienne signed her name in a ledger that smelled of dust and old ink. To the ring was a thin band of copper that Nathaniel had shaped himself. He was a carpenter, after all, bending and filing it in his workshop while she waited in his small, tidy room. His room, she noticed the books first. They were everywhere, stacked on the windowsill, piled beside the narrow bed, arranged on a shelf he had clearly built himself. Thucydides, Milton, a well-thumbed volume of botanical illustrations. Books a carpenter's wages could barely afford. "You read a great deal," she said. "Yes." He offered no further explanation. The first week of their marriage was a landscape of silence. Nathaniel left before dawn each day and returned at dusk, and hands rough with sawdust and wood stain. He spoke little. He ate the meals she prepared, badly at first, until the landlady, a stout, warm-faced woman named Mrs. Ormond, took pity on her and taught her how to make a proper soup and a loaf that did not collapse in the middle. He slept on a pallet on the floor of the small sitting area. She had the bed. He never entered the bedroom without knocking. He never touched her. He was, in every sense, a stranger who happened to share her name. But she watched him as she had watched him that first night. She noticed things, the way he arranged his tools with the precision of a surgeon. The way he paused at the window each morning and looked out at the sky as if reading something there. The small bowl of scraps he left on the back step each evening, the same quiet offering to whatever stray creature might find it. He was not what he appeared. She was certain of it. No common laborer read Thucydides in the original Greek. She had glimpsed the text, and her own education, fragmentary as it was enough to recognize it. No odd-job carpenter carried himself with that unconscious authority, that stillness that had nothing to do with shyness and everything to do with restraint. She did not ask. She was learning that trust, like the stray cat, would only come if she waited and did not reach. On the 8th day, everything changed. Nathaniel came home early, face drawn tight. "We must leave London," he said. "Tonight. My mother. Your mother and Sir Philip. They are petitioning to have the marriage annulled. They claim coercion. Philip has influence with certain magistrates. To find you. Where will we go? Somewhere safe. He hesitated, and for the first time she saw something crack in his composure. Not fear, reluctance, as if what came next would cost him something he had spent years protecting. Do you trust me, Vivienne? It was the first time he had used her given name. Yes, she said, and meant it, and they left, in a hired coach that was far too fine for a carpenter's wages. Vivienne noted this, but said nothing. They travelled north for 2 days through the sprawl of London and into the green, rolling countryside beyond. The air changed. It grew cleaner, wetter, scented with earth and hedgerow blossom. On the second evening, the coach turned off the main road and onto a private drive lined with ancient elms. The drive stretched on and on, impossibly long. Vivienne's unease grew with each passing minute. This was not the approach to a cottage or a farmhouse. This was the approach to something else entirely. The trees opened, and she saw it. The house rose from the landscape, as if the land itself had dreamed it into being, and it was built of warm golden stone, 3 stories high, with a long facade of tall windows that caught the last of the evening light and held it like honey in glass. A lake spread before it, still as a mirror. Beyond the lake, parkland rolled toward a distant line of blue hills. It was not merely large. It was the kind of house that had a name, a history, a weight in the world. The coach stopped. The great doors opened, and the servants came out. A line of them, 20 or more, their faces white with shock. The butler, an elderly man with silver hair and a bearing as rigid as a column, stepped forward. He looked at Nathaniel, still dressed in his labourer's clothes, and his composure fractured entirely. His eyes filled with tears. "Your Grace," he said, "welcome home. Your Grace." Vivienne turned to the man beside her, her husband, the carpenter from Wren Court, who read Greek and fed stray cats and slept on the floor so she could have the bed. He was not looking at the butler. He was looking at her. His green eyes held exhaustion and guilt and something she could not name. "My name," he said quietly, "is Nathaniel Ashby. I am the Duke of Kingsworth. I am sorry, Vivienne. I am sorry for all of it." The world tilted. The golden house, the bowing servants, the impossible scale of the lie. It crashed over her like a wave, and she stood in the wreckage of everything she thought she knew, staring at a stranger who wore her husband's face. She did not speak to him for 3 days. The house, Ashthorpe, was a palace in all but name. Its bedroom was larger than the entire apartment on Wren Court. The bed had curtains of pale blue silk. There was a marble fireplace taller than she was, and a bathing room with copper taps that produced hot water at will. She was attended by a lady's maid, a timid girl named Phoebe, said every time Vivienne entered a room. She ate alone in a dining room designed to seat 40. The food was exquisite and tasted like nothing. She walked the grounds, miles of them, trying to breathe, trying to think. She walked past the lake, through the walled garden where roses bloomed in disciplined rows, along a path that led to a stone chapel with stained glass windows. Everything was immaculate, maintained by an army of gardeners and groundsmen who bowed as she passed. Everything was beautiful. Everything was a lie. On the 3rd evening, she found the library. It was the heart of the house, 2 stories of books, floor to ceiling, with a gallery running around the upper level. A fire burned in the grate, and Nathaniel, Alexander, the Duke, she did not know what to call him, sat in a leather chair beside it. a glass of untouched brandy in his hand, staring at nothing. On the mantelpiece above the fire, a small portrait in a silver frame. A woman with auburn hair and laughing dark eyes, beautiful, vivid, everything Vivienne was not. "Who is she?" Vivienne asked from the doorway. Her voice sounded strange in the vast room, small and flat. "My wife," he said, hitting himself with visible pain. "My first wife, Annabelle. She died here. 2 years ago." Vivienne entered the room. She did not sit, she stood before him, and she let him see the anger in her face. "You lied to me." "Yes, everything. The room on Wren Court, the carpentry, the name. All of it was a lie. Not all of it." He looked up at her, and his eyes were raw. "The books were real. It was real. I needed it, needed to do something with my hands, something that had nothing to do with this." He gestured vaguely at the grand room. "After Annabelle died, this house became a tomb. I could not breathe in it. I could not be the Duke, so I left. I became someone else, someone who did not have to carry the weight of all this grief. And me? Was I real? You were the most real thing I had encountered in 2 years." Vivienne sat down in the chair opposite him. She picked up the portrait of Annabelle and studied it. The woman's smile was wide and unguarded, the smile of someone who had never learned to hide. "The rooms they gave me," Vivienne said, "they were hers." He flinched. "I did not think. I simply told them to prepare the best rooms. I am sorry. I will have you moved." "No." She set the portrait down gently. "It is all right, Ika. She is part of this house. I would not erase her." Something broke in his expression then, dramatically. A hairline fracture, the kind that lets light through. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as the desperate girl on his doorstep, not as the quiet wife in his borrowed rooms, but as someone who understood loss and did not look away from it. "You are not what I expected, Vivienne," he said. "No one ever expects the quiet ones," she replied. She did not forgive him that night. Forgiveness was too large a word for what was happening between them. But she returned to the library the next evening, and the one after that. She chose books from his shelves and read in the chair opposite his hand. They sat in a silence that gradually lost its edges. She began to work on the conservatory, a beautiful glass room at the east end of the house that had fallen into ruin. Dead plants, steep panes, the smell of earth gone sour. She cleared it out herself, despite Phoebe's protests. She got dirt under her fingernails, scented herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender, practical, hardy things that would survive neglect. "You are bringing it back to life," Nathaniel said one morning, standing in the doorway, watching her work. "Things die when you shut them away from the light," she said without looking up. "Even dukes." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and knelt beside her in the soil and began to dig. The Dowager Duchess arrived on a Thursday, announced by a coach and four and a voice that could strip paint from a wall at 30 paces. Lady Dorothea Ashby was 71 years old, 5 feet tall, and entirely without fear. She swept into the morning room where Vivienne sat reading, and surveyed her with eyes that were the same pale green as her son's. "So," she said, "you are the carpenter's wife." "I am," Vivienne said, rising. "Your Grace, sit down. I have not come to inspect you. I have come to thank you." The dowager lowered herself into a chair and fixed Vivienne with a gaze of startling directness. "My son has not written to me in 2 years. Last week, I received a letter, 8 pages. He told me about Ashthorpe, about the conservatory, about the herbs you planted. He told me about you. I am not sure what there is to tell. He said you were honest. He said, You did not try to be Annabel, and you did not try to make him forget her. And he said you simply were. The dowager paused. That is the finest compliment my son has ever paid another human being. Vivienne's eyes burned. She blinked the feeling away. Now, Lady Dorothea said briskly, we have a problem. Your mother and that dreadful man, Sir Philip, are making a spectacle of themselves in London. They are calling you unstable, claiming the marriage is invalid, petitioning every magistrate who will listen. It must be stopped. How? The dowager smiled. There's a smile that had, over 7 decades, terrified prime ministers and charmed kings. We will go to London. We will open Kingsworth House, Nigra, and we will introduce the Duke and Duchess of Kingsworth to society. By the time we are finished, your mother will not dare show her face in any drawing room south of Edinburgh. The return to London was a campaign, and Lady Dorothea was its general. Kingsworth House, the family's London residence, was a great pale mansion on St. James's Square that had stood shuttered and silent for 2 years. It was thrown open, scrubbed, polished, filled with flowers and light. Invitations were sent for a ball. The date was set. The ton held its breath. During the preparations, something shifted between Vivienne and Nathaniel. The shared purpose, the shared enemy, drew them together in ways that silence alone could not. They sat up late in the smaller London library, planning the guest list, rehearsing introductions, and for the first time they talked, truly talked. He told her about Oxford, about his years abroad, sketching cathedrals in Italy and France, about his father, the previous Duke, whose expectations had been a weight Nathaniel carried like stones in his pockets, about Annabel. How they had grown up on neighboring estates, how their marriage had been expected, how he had loved her deeply, but always sensed a restlessness in her that he could not reach. Died of a fever, he said one evening, his voice raw and low. It took 3 days. I sat beside her the entire time. I held her hand, and I could do nothing. It was not your fault, Vivienne said softly. I was her husband. I was supposed to. You were supposed to love her, and you did. He looked at her. In the firelight, his eyes were dark and bright at once. He reached out and touched her hand where it rested on the arm of her chair. It was the first time he had initiated contact. His fingers were warm and rough, a carpenter's hands, still, despite everything. Vivienne, he said. Just her name. Nothing more, but the way he said it, as if it were a word he had only just learned and was tasting for the first time, made her heart turn over in her chest. He did not kiss her that night. The ghost of Annabel still stood between them, and Vivienne understood that some doors must be opened slowly, or not at all. But the next morning, when she came down to breakfast, the long formal table had been replaced by a small round one set in the window, laid for 2. Nathaniel was already seated, reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered. Good morning, Vivienne, he said, and smiled. The night of the ball, Kingsworth House blazed with candlelight, and music poured from the open windows into St. James's Square, where a line of carriages stretched around the block. Every significant name in London had accepted. Curiosity was a more powerful force than loyalty. Vivienne stood at the top of the staircase, Nathaniel beside her. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, not Annabel's, but her own, mentioned by Lady Dorothea with an unerring eye. Simple in cut, devastating in effect, a single strand of pearls at her throat. Her hair was swept up, her chin was level, and her hands were ice-cold. Nathaniel took her hand. Together, he said, together. They descended. The crowd fell silent. 500 pairs of eyes, watched the lost Duke of Kingsworth walk into his own ballroom with the unknown woman on his arm. The carpenter's wife, the beggar bride, yet the mystery that all of London had been whispering about for weeks. Tillet, the dowager, waited at the foot of the stairs, magnificent in black lace, her expression one of fierce, triumphant pride. They had been there for perhaps an hour of introductions, of smiles, of Vivienne, navigating the treacherous waters of high society with a quiet grace that surprised even herself. When the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened without announcement, Lady Graves entered first, dressed in violent magenta, her face set in an expression of righteous fury. Behind her, Sir Philip Waldegrave, his moustache freshly waxed, his smile the practiced smile of a man who believed the world owed him everything. They had not been invited. The music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned. "Vivienne," Lady Graves's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Thank heaven. We have been frantic with worry. To this man," she pointed a shaking finger at Nathaniel, "this impostor has stolen my daughter. The marriage is a fraud. He is a common laborer, a nobody." Sir Philip stepped forward, his hand extended toward Vivienne. "Come, my dear, this farce has gone on long enough. You are coming home." If Vivienne felt Nathaniel tense beside her. She felt the weight of every gaze in the room. She felt, for one dizzying moment, the pull of her old life, the obedience, the submission, the safety of surrender. Then she looked at the man beside her, her husband, the Duke who had knelt on cobblestones to feed a stray cat, the widower who had run from his own grief and found in a desperate girl's mad proposal a reason to stop running. Ishnan, the man who had let her into his locked rooms, who had dug in the dirt beside her, who had placed his hand on hers in the firelight and said her name as if it meant something. Dear. She removed her mother's hand from her arm. She stepped away from Sir Philip. She took Nathaniel's arm and held it. "You are mistaken, Mamma," she said. Her voice was clear and carried to every corner of the room. "This is my husband, Nathaniel Ashby, Duke of Kingsworth, and I am his Duchess. I have never," her voice wavered, then steadied, "never been more certain of anything in my life." The silence held for one heartbeat. Two. Then, the Dowager Duchess began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the hushed room. Others followed, Lord and Lady Carlisle, to the Duchess of Bainford. One by one, then all at once the room erupted in applause. Lady Graves stood frozen, her mouth working soundlessly. She had come to expose a fraud, and had instead cemented her daughter's place at the very summit of society. Sir Philip, reading the room with the instinct of a man who always knew when to retreat, muttered something about a misunderstanding and melted into the crowd. Lady Graves was left alone, a small, furious figure in garish magenta, surrounded by faces that pitied her. Vivienne looked at her mother and felt no victory. Only a deep, aching sadness for a woman who had been so consumed by fear, of poverty, of insignificance, of the world's indifference, that she had tried to sell the only person who might have loved her unconditionally. Nathaniel drew her close. "Shall we give them something worth remembering?" he murmured. He led her to the center of the floor. The musician struck up a waltz, and as the whole of London society watched, the Duke and Duchess of Kingsworth danced. For Vivienne, the room dissolved. The candles, the faces, the whispers, until there was only the warmth of his hand at her waist, the steady rhythm of his steps, and his eyes, those pale green eyes, looking at her with an openness she had never seen in them before. Every wall was down, every locked door open. "Love you, Vivienne," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "I think I have since the moment you stood on my doorstep and asked a stranger to save you. You saved me instead." "I love you, Nathaniel," she whispered back. "My Carpenter, my Duke." He kissed her then, in the center of the ballroom, in front of 500 witnesses. It was not a polite kiss. It was not a formal kiss. It was the kiss of two people who had found each other in the dark and had chosen, against every odd and every obstacle, to step into the light together. 6 months later, till sun turned Ashthorpe to gold, the trees around the lake blazed red and amber, and the air smelled of wood smoke and ripe apples. The house was alive, truly alive, in a way that even the oldest servants could not remember. Windows stood open, laughter echoed through corridors that had known only silence for 2 years. Mrs. Ormond, the landlady from Wren Court, was now head housekeeper, no-nonsense warmth, a match for the grandeur of her new domain. The neighborhood children from Wren Court had been brought to the estate for the autumn. Fresh air, good food, doctor's care for those who needed it. Nathaniel had insisted. Vivienne had insisted harder. He was a duke again, not because he had returned to the title, but because the title had found its purpose. He sat in the House of Lords now and spoke about housing, about labor, about the invisible people who kept great houses running and got nothing in return. He spoke from experience. He spoke as Miles Cole, as Nathaniel Harding, as a man who had lived on Wren Court and knew what cold and hunger looked like from the inside. Annabel's portrait remained on the library mantelpiece. A new miniature, Vivienne, in her emerald gown, her expression calm and direct. The two women, the two duchesses side by side. The past honored, the present embraced. Vivienne stood on the terrace, a woolen shawl around her shoulders, watching Nathaniel by the lake. He was skipping stones with the Ormond children, his coat off, his sleeves rolled up, laughing. He looked up, saw her watching, and raised his hand. She raised hers in return. He jogged up the slope and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about a man I saw from a window," she said. He was kneeling in an alley feeding a stray cat. He did not know anyone was watching. He did not care. He was quiet for a moment. "I am thinking about a girl who knocked on my door and offered me £40 and the chance to remember what it felt like to be human." She turned to face him, a hand against his cheek. "You were never invisible, Nathaniel. Even when you were hiding, I saw you, and you," he said, his voice thick, "were never the quiet one in the corner. Vivienne, you were the only person in the room." He kissed her slowly, gently, with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew he was home. The sun sank behind the hills. The lake turned to copper. The house stood golden and breathing behind them, every window lit. Thank you for listening to the story, all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from, and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss new stories.